are honored to have among us someone who began with programming and system analysis and writing software codes early in her career. But her love for creative writing soon found her sending in stories for the children's magazine Tingle. And today, she is a renowned author for children's books who is much loved by her readers. Miss Anushka Ravishankar, often called the Indian Dr. Seuss. Till date, she has written over 35 books for children, including picture books in verse, chapter books, retellings of folk tales, and non-fiction. She also worked as an editor at Tara Books and Scholastic India before she co-founded Duckbill Books, which is now an imprint of Penguin Random House, India. Some of the earliest Indian picture books to be published internationally and win international awards were by her, such as Tiger on a Tree, Catch That Crocodile, and Elephants Never Forget. Several of her books have won awards, including White Raven Special Mentions, USBBY's list of outstanding books, and the South Asian Book Award. Many of the books have been co-published internationally in over a dozen countries, including Australia, USA, Korea, South Africa, Japan, and several European countries. Anushka ma'am has gone on to collaborate with many international illustrators to create some extraordinary picture books. More recently, her chapter books have also been much loved, such as Moin and the Monster and the Zen and the Anna series. We extend a warm welcome to you. Put that smile for Story Times with Miss Anushka Ravishankar.
Sir, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Sakshi. Sorry, I was on mute, I didn't realize. So, thank you for that introduction and thank you for inviting me to this. I was listening a little bit, I was eavesdropping on the previous session and I found it really fascinating. I'm not sure how many people are here, so I'm going to just start with talking about, I'm going to be reading two books today to you, from two books. One is this one, Hey Diddle Diddle, and the other one is The Rumor. But before I start reading, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I started writing children's books in the first place. Right? So, you know, when we were kids, most of the time, if we were asked to, if our parents, many parents don't let their children read storybooks. They think it's a waste of time. I think that's changed now. But even when they do read storybooks, children are usually told that, you know, read something that's useful, read something that has a good moral of the story and things like that. So when I started writing books for children, I decided that I didn't want to do that, right? I wanted to write books that were just fun and that would make children laugh because I like reading books like that. I like reading, I don't know if all of you have heard of this term nonsense verse. I love reading nonsense verse and I love writing nonsense verse. So that's the kind of thing that I wanted to write for kids. But mostly when I started writing, this was in very long ago, 30 years ago. Most of the books that were being published for children were all very serious books, which had a moral of the story. So then when I started writing, I decided I just wanted to write silly, fun books to read, you know, which will make children laugh and smile. So I'd keep looking around for interesting stories, especially about animals. I love writing about animals. So I keep looking for interesting little snippets that I'd get on the news, and friends would tell me about it because they knew I was interested in that kind of thing. So a lot of the books that I wrote came out of that, like the two books couple of the books that were mentioned. One was Catch That Crocodile. So how this book happened was that I was living in Baroda and there was a flood. And during the floods, there's a zoo in Baroda which had a crocodile pond. So the water came up and went over the fence, right? So the crocodiles got over the fence and swam all over the city. And when the water went down suddenly, They found one crocodile in a well, they found a crocodile in a ditch. And I read about that in the paper. And from that came this book, Catch That Crocodile. So I thought, I kind of looked at it from the crocodile's point of view. The poor thing is stuck in a ditch and there are all these very strange people coming to try and get rid of it. So it has a lot of very funny characters who are trying to catch the crocodiles. It's called Catch That Crocodile. But finally, it's a little girl who finds an easy way to get rid of the crocodile without harming the crocodile. Right? So that was one. Then another book, like Elephants Never Forget, which also happened in an interesting way, which is that a friend told me about this television program which I watched, in which there's an elephant which is running with a herd of buffaloes. So I started wondering how could that have happened, and that's what became this story, Elephants Never Forget. It's a made-up story about how an elephant began to live with buffaloes. So what I do is I look for funny stories, and sometimes they stay in my head for years before they become a book. Like this one, Hey Diddle Diddle, is one of my most recent books. What happened was, again, this happened many years ago. Somebody sent me an article from a German magazine, which talked about a little girl who she lived on a farm, and she wanted a horse to jump over fences and all that. But her parents said, nothing doing, we will not get you a horse. We have enough animals here. We won't get you a horse. So she taught her cow to jump. I read about that many years ago, and it was in my head, and I wanted somebody to write about it, but I never did. Then I had to write a story for this series called the Hook Books, which we did at Duckbill. And so when I started writing the story, suddenly that thought came back to my head about about the girl who wanted the horse. Now, the reason I'm reading the story here today is because it's about friendship. Ultimately, it's not so much about the horse or anything. It's about these two girls who become friends, basically because they have the same sense of humor. They laugh at the same things. So when you laugh at the same things, you immediately bond with each other, right? So this is about how laughter brought these girls together, but then they fought, and then it was laughter that brought them back together again. So I'm first going to read this book. It's a short book, so I'll be able to read the whole thing. I'll have to stop once in a while to show you the pictures. It's called Hey Diddle Diddle. It's illustrated, got these fabulous illustrations by Priya Kurian. And yeah, so it's Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such fun, and the dish ran away with the spoon. Meenuti, this is Meenuti, was in class, only half listening to her teacher. From the kindergarten next door, she could hear the children singing that song, Hey diddle diddle. Can a cow jump? She wondered. Surely not. Horses could jump. A horse might be able to jump over the moon. She turned to ask her friend Susan. Then she remembered that Susan was not talking to her. That's Susan, not talking to her. Meenuti wished she had a horse. But when she asked Acha and Amma, now this story is set in Kerala, right? So Acha and Amma is what in Malayalam father and mother are called. So when she asked Acha and Amma, they said no. They pointed out to Meenuti that they had chickens, ducks, 2 cats, 1 dog, and Kallu the cow. Meenuti pointed out to them that a horse would be very useful. It could take them around instead of their silly scooter, which never started. Achanama pointed out that they had bicycles, so they could zip around on them and no need to trouble a poor horse. Meenuti pointed out that was why they always reached home sweating and panting with their tongues out like doggy. She left the room in a huff. It did not help that she could hear Achanama giggling back in the room. Meenuti actually liked the chickens and ducks. She liked playing with Doggy. The cats, Putti and Kitty, were not very friendly, but sometimes they brought home birds and squirrels. Then everyone had to run around madly to rescue them. It was very exciting. She especially liked hanging out with Kallu the cow. She was so nice and calm. That's Kallu the cow. Before she had a best friend, Meenuti came back from school and spent her time happily with the animals at home. She didn't even think about horses. Then Susan joined school. Susan had come from Dubai and she did not look or talk like the other children in Meenuti's class. She sat next to Meenuti But for many days, they did not speak to each other. Then one day, Susan asked, "Your name is Meena, right? Then why does everyone call you Minuti? They call me Susie at home. That's because it's short for Susan. Minuti is longer than Meena." Minuti didn't know what to say. Now I need to tell you something here, which is that in Kerala, Kutti means child, right? So everybody would, so every lot of little children whose names may be like maybe Sandhya will be called Sandhya Kutti, right? And there'll be a boy called Suresh will be called Suresh Kutti because Kutti is a child. But sometimes when a name is like Meena, then they say Meena Kutti becomes Meena Kutti becomes Minuti. And that's how Minuti ended up being called Minuti. Her mother told her that Kutti meant child and Minuti was a way of saying Meena Kutti. So the next day during the break, Minuti wrote on a piece of paper, Meena plus Kutti, I don't know if you can see that clearly, Meena plus Kutti equal to Minuti. Susan giggled for 5 minutes straight when she saw that. Minuti scowled. She didn't understand why Susan was giggling. But then Susan wrote, Susie plus Kutti equals Susuti. And that was so funny that they both rolled on the floor laughing. And that's how they became best friends. Minuti had never until then had a best friend that was not a dog or a cow. So she couldn't stop talking about Susan. She went Susan this, Susan that, Susan the other, until her parents said, okay, let's invite Susan over to spend one Sunday with Minuti. So, but on Saturday night, just the day before, Kallu, the cow, decided to have a calf. Acha and Amma and Indu, Chechi and Maniatan were the people who helped them in the farm. You can see that Indu, Chechi, Maniatan, Acha and Amma, that's the parents. They spent all night in the cow shed. Minuti was so excited she couldn't sleep. Finally, Amma took her to the shed to see the new calf. She was adorable. That's the new calf. Minuti loved the calf. She loved the calf so much that when Acha and Amma asked her to name her, she said she would call her Susie because Susie was her best friend and she loved Susie and she loved the calf. So she decided to call the calf Susie. When Susan came the next day, she brought a book for Minuti. It was about a girl who rode a horse and won many jumping competitions. I have a gift for you too, Minuti said. And she told her about the calf called Susie. But Susan was not pleased. How could you call her by my name? I'm not a cow, she wailed. I don't want to be a cow. Cows are stupid. That led to a big fight. Minuti said cows were the best animals ever. Susan said she could at least have named a horse after her. Horses can run fast and jump high. Horses are cool. See, she showed Minuti the pictures in the book of the girl jumping with doing show jumping on a horse. Horses do show jumping and races and things. Cows just stand around looking silly and going moo. But I don't have a horse, Minuti cried. That's not my fault, Susan yelled. So they are yelling at each other. They had to spend the day together because Susan's father would only come to fetch her in the evening. By the time he came, Susan and Minuti were no longer best friends. In fact, they were not even talking to each other. You can see that there. Minuti read the book that Susan gave her over and over again. She really wanted to learn how to jump over fences with a horse. She was angry with her parents for not buying her a horse. Horses could run fast and jump high. Horses were so cool. But she didn't have a horse. So Minuti began to spend more and more time with Kallu the cow and Susie the calf. Kutti and Kitty, the two cats, they bullied all the new animals. So they chased Susie all the time. When Susie saw Kutti and Kitty coming, she would run to the other end of the field. She was such a fast runner that the cats would give up halfway and take a nap in the middle of the field. Minuti was watching Susie run one day and she thought she runs as fast as any horse. And then she thought of the nursery rhyme she had heard that morning. and the cow jumped over the moon. Maybe, thought Susie, maybe it was possible. Many months later, they had sports day at school. Meenuti and Susan were still not talking to each other. The smaller children did their lemon and spoon races and sack races and running races. You can see the children doing their races. Then the older children had an obstacle race. Just as the senior obstacle race got over, a shout went out. There was someone on the field. It was Meenuti riding Susie. Susie came running towards the finishing line, but there were obstacles in the way. The children started screaming. The cow came to the first obstacle. Meenuti said something in her ear, and the cow jumped. She sailed over the first obstacle. The crowd clapped. She sailed over the second obstacle. The crowd cheered. One by one, the cow cleared all the obstacles and reached the finishing line. The crowd roared. Meenuti grinned from ear to ear. Susie seemed to be grinning as well. As for Susan, she was rolling on the floor laughing. Meenuti didn't ask for a horse again, and Susan admitted the cows were pretty cool too. So Susan and Meenuti became friends again. Hey, diddle diddle. That's the first book. So that's a story about two little girls who became friends because of laughing together. And then they fought over something very silly. And then they became friends again because they were laughing together again. So when you laugh together, you make, your bonds get stronger. You become friends because you feel happy with the person that you're laughing with. The second book that I'm going to read, which is called The Rumor, is also about a grumpy chap who never smiles. So this is also about smiling and laughing, right? It's called The Rumor. It's based on a folktale. The folktale is about how a little rumor, when people pass it on and on and on, can grow bigger and bigger and bigger and become like a crazy story. But this story is not just about the rumor growing, it's also about a grumpy chap called Panduri. What's his name? Oh, I wrote the book. So the illustrations are by this wonderful illustrator called Kanyika Kini. She's done the illustrations in the book, and this is the book that won one of the awards that was mentioned, the Saba Award. So this is The Rumor. And this book is set in Maharashtra. So you see, I'm from Kerala, so I could write this book because I know all about Kerala. And I've grown up in Maharashtra. So this book is set completely in Maharashtra. So the characters are all Maharashtrian. So, the way they dress and the way they speak, it's all very, very Maharashtrian. Deep in the Sahyadri Mountains, there was a village called Badbadpur. The village was in the middle of a green forest where they grew the most delicious fruits and vegetables. So the people were prosperous and happy and had nothing much to do most of the time. So they talked and gossiped and told tall tales because they had nothing better to do. Some of the tales they told were so tall that if you put them one on top of the other, they would reach the stars. This is Badbadpur, beautiful green place in the mountains with people are so happy and prosperous that they have nothing much to do. So they're constantly gossiping, which is what people do, right? When you have nothing to do, you gossip. When you have enough to do, then you don't care about what other people are doing. Now, in the same village, there was an ill-tempered man called Pandurang. He was so grumpy that no one in the village had ever seen him smile. This is grumpy Pandurang. He was so dour that people said that milk turned into curd when he looked at it. There is milk turning into curd. He scowled at stories and snorted at jokes. So people stayed away from him. Nobody went to Pandurang's house. Nobody went anywhere near Pandurang's house. And he was quite satisfied with the state of affairs because he didn't want to see anybody. He was such a grumpy chap. Pandurang often went down to the plains to sell the fruits that grew in his backyard. One day, as he was coming back from town, he had a sudden coughing fit. He coughed and coughed and coughed. Something seemed to be stuck in his throat. So he coughed and coughed and coughed again and spat out a feather. There is the feather he's coughing out. Imagine his surprise. He frowned at the feather. He scowled at the sky. How could a feather that belonged to a bird in the sky have come into his throat? He could not understand it at all. After a while, he set off again towards the village. But every few minutes, he stopped, looked at the sky, shook his head, and cleared his throat. By the time he reached home, his head was aching, his throat was sore, and a deep furrow had settled between his eyebrows, like that. What's the matter? Why do you look like you swallowed a lemon? Asked his wife, Gangubai. Gangu, whispered Pandurang hoarsely. The strangest thing happened today. What? Asked Gangubai. I was coming from the town. It was warm and beautiful weather. When suddenly I coughed, and out came a white downy feather. A feather? How's that? Asked Gangubai. I don't know, whispered Pandurang, but don't tell anyone. Of course, said Gangubai. But did Gangubai not tell anyone, you think? No, because that's not what gossipy people do, right? As soon as this is Pandurang and this is Gangubai. Because as soon as a gossipy person hears a piece of gossip, they have to tell it to somebody. So as soon as Pandurang had eaten his lunch and gone to take a nap, Gangu slipped off to see her neighbor and best friend, Sakhubai. Sakhu, she whispered to Kate, come here. I have to tell you something. The strangest thing happened today. What? Asked Sakhubai. It's the strangest thing I've heard. My husband coughed a bird. When he tried to talk, it flew out like a word. When he tried to sing, it flapped out like a song. A bird out of his mouth. I think something is wrong. A bird? How's that? Asked Sakhubai. I don't know, said Gangubai. But don't tell anyone. Of course, said Sakhubai. And as soon as Gangubai had left, she went to visit her mother-in-law on the other side of the village. This is Gangubai telling Sakhubai that her husband coughed, not a feather, but a bird. She goes to her mother-in-law. Now, in mother-in-law in Marathi is Sasubai. That's what they call. Okay? Sasubai, she called out to her mother-in-law. Do you know the strangest thing happened today? What? Asked her mother-in-law. My friend Sakhu, who lives over there, told me something that made me stare. She said her husband had gone out of town, and when he came back, guess what she found? What? Asked Sasubai. Her head was about to burst with curiosity. A flock of white birds were flying right out of her husband Pandurang's wide open mouth. There's the flock of birds. So from a feather it became a bird, now it's become a flock of birds. Gabai, a flock of birds. How's that? I don't know, but don't tell anyone. Of course, said her mother-in-law. And as soon as Sakhubai left, she went to her brother who was lying under guava tree and dreaming of mangoes. Babya, she shouted to her brother. Do you know the strangest thing happened today? What? Asked Babya grumpily. He had just been about to eat that mango in his dream. A tree grew inside Pandu's mouth. It grew and grew and grew and grew. And on that tree they came to nest, a flock of birds, full 62. And when Pandu opened his mouth, they flew and flew and flew and flew. I barely can believe the tale. But Sakhu saw it, so it's true. So from the flock of birds, it became a tree with 62 birds. And these are the birds flying out of Pandurang's mouth. A tree with nests full of birds. How's that? I don't know, but don't tell anyone. Of course, said Babya. And as soon as his sister had left, he went to the tea shop where Ramu and Lakya, his friends, were drinking a strong cup of masala chai. Hey, Ramya, Lakya, do you know the strangest thing happened today? What? Asked Ramu and Lakya, bored. Nothing ever happened in Badbadpur. You know of old Pandu, that one? That grumpy chap, Ganyaba's son. He swallowed a forest in town. I'm telling the truth, don't frown. Sakhu, my niece-in-law, told Tai, my sister, she saw the forest of trees in his jaw, with birds going chirrup and caw. When he opened his mouth to say hi, all the birds started to fly. So from a feather to a bird to a flock of birds to a tree full of birds, it's become a forest. This is the forest in Pandu's mouth with lots of birds. A whole forest? How's that? I don't know, but don't tell anyone. Very soon it was all over the village that there was a forest growing in Pandurang's mouth, and it was full of not just birds, but tigers, monkeys, wolves, bears, elephants, and that when Pandurang opened his mouth and talked, out flew parrots, mynas, peacocks, quails, hoopoes, woodpeckers, kingfishers. The list grew longer and longer. That is Pandurang's mouth, according to the people in the village. With you can see the tiger and you can see the elephant and you can see the different birds, the hoopoe and the woodpecker and the parrot, different kinds of birds coming out of his mouth and lots of animals. And this is what the village, all people in the village had started believing. So naturally, people began to go head for Pandurang's house because they had to see this wonderful sight for themselves. They forgot all about his grumpiness and his bad temper because they wanted to see the things growing and birds flying and animals coming out of his mouth. What a wonderful sight, they thought. Pandurang, meanwhile, was tired with all that coughing and spitting and all that, and he was fast asleep. His mouth was open, the horrible snoring was coming from his nose, and the stomach heaved up and down as if keeping time to the snores. There's Pandurang fast asleep. Suddenly, his sleep was disturbed by the sound of voices. Pandurang disliked human voices. He was a grumpy fellow, remember? Scowling and muttering, he got up and went to the door. Who are these people who have come to disturb my sleep? His wife Gangu was standing there talking to what looked like the whole village. It was, in fact, the whole village, except for one deaf old man who hadn't heard the rumor because he couldn't hear and was sitting at home saying, why isn't somebody giving me my dinner? When Pandu appeared at the door, a gasp passed through the crowd. There was a sudden silence as they all stared at him, waiting for him to say something so that they could see the flocks of birds flying out of his mouth. Pandu opened his mouth, a long sigh of expectation from the crowd, and he yawned. A murmur of disappointment. Suddenly, someone in the crowd shouted, "Hey, Pandu, say something." Pandu scowled harder. The furrow on his forehead grew so deep that if you filled it with water, you could sail a ship in it. Go away, he said. And of course, nothing came out of his mouth. Everyone started talking. Where's the forest? Where's the tigers? Where's the flock? Where's the bird? Where's the feather? Where's the... Stop, shouted Pandu. Will someone tell me what is going on? We heard that in your mouth were beasts of every kind. Yes, we thought we'd find beasts of every kind. We heard that there were leopards, tigers, wolves, and bears. We thought that we'd see them there, tigers, wolves, and bears. We also heard there was a flock of flying birds. Yes, this is what we heard, that there's a flock of birds. We heard that when you speak, the birds all fly right out. Yes, out of your mouth, we heard that birds fly out. Well, at least we thought that we would see one bird. Yes, with every word, we thought you'd spit a bird. If not a whole big bird, we thought we'd see a feather. We're waiting for it, brother. Let's see you spit a feather. Pandu listened to them with a deep frown on his face. But with each crazy line, his frown got lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. And by the time they got to the feather, a big smile broke out on Pandu's face. This was such a rare sight that the crowd went silent with awe. And in that silence fell the rarest sound that Badbadpur had ever heard. Pandu laughed. He laughed and laughed till he was rolling on the ground. Soon the whole village was shrieking and laughing and gasping with laughter. There's Pandu laughing and there's the rest of the village laughing. Everybody laughed and laughed and laughed. And even today, Badbadpur talks, everyone in Badbadpur talks about the day that Pandu spat a feather and laughed and laughed and laughed till he cried. Everyone except one deaf-old man, because he didn't hear the rumor and he fell asleep without eating any dinner. That's the story of the rumor. So these are the two stories that I wanted to tell you guys today, because it's all about laughter and smiling, and how when you laugh, you become, you, not only you but all the people around you also start laughing, and everyone gets happy. So keep smiling and keep laughing. Now we have a few minutes left. So if anybody wants to ask anything about the stories or about writing, about books, anything, I'm happy to take questions.
Namaste, Anushka ma'am.
Hi, one second. I'm not able to see you very clearly. Yeah.
Are you
Okay.
locate me?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, got me now?
Yeah.
Ma'am, it was an absolute pleasure listening to you, and I'm sure you've left most of us students asking for more. So I have a few questions coming in from the students. So, what would be your message to the aspiring writers among us who would like to venture into fiction for young children in India?
For young children, or I mean, you're talking about children who want to write, right?
Yes, aspiring writers who would like to write fiction for young children in India.
Right. So, first of all, I'd say that you have to keep writing, you have to keep doing it, because it's like any other muscle, you know, the more you exercise it, the better you get at it, and the stronger that muscle becomes. So the writing is like a muscle. It's like you have to build it by keeping on writing. You also have to read a lot. You have to read anything that comes your way, because you have to be a writer. You have to be curious about everything, which is what I said. Remember right at the start that I'm always looking out for funny stories, things that come, because the ideas come from what's happening around you. Sometimes it changes completely into something very different from what the actual story is, which is what a good fiction writer does. You take a little germ of an idea and then you turn it into the story that you want to turn it into. The few things that you have to keep in mind when you're writing a story is think about the characters, right? Like, for example, this book, The Rumor, it came out of a project of writing folk tales. So the folk tale is about, it's called The Feather, and it just talks about a man who spat a feather, and the rumor grew and grew and grew. The thing about Pandurang, his character, his grumpy character, and how he, you know, this whole thing made him laugh, that all that was added by me. That's not part of the folk tale that was there. So you got to use your imagination as well, and you have to create characters who the reader would be interested in. And as far as possible, again, write about things that you're familiar with, which also I pointed out. I wrote one story that was set in Kerala, one story that's set in Maharashtra. It's because I'm familiar with these two places, right? So the kind of people who will be there, I know what, you know, I can see them in my head. And that's very important when you're writing a story. Because one mistake I find that a lot of young people do, because we read, I used to do that myself when I was young, because the books that I read were all Enid Blyton and, you know, Nancy Drew, and you read books from the West. So when you start writing, you're writing about children called John and Mary and Bob and George, you know. And whereas when you write about the children, about the things that you know, about a milieu that you're familiar with, the place that you're familiar with, and the kind of people that you would see around you, then your story becomes much richer, becomes much more believable, which is what I've tried to do with a lot of my books. Like even with, somebody mentioned Zain and Anna, a lot of the stuff that happened in Zain and Anna happened in a place that I was familiar with in my head. I've not mentioned which place it is, but you kind of use a familiar place and then you put interesting fictional characters in it. So it's a combination of what you know and your imagination. And when they work together well, then the story happens. It's not always that a story works out perfectly the way you want to. Sometimes you start writing. That's another thing. You don't get discouraged when you start writing and the story doesn't go where you want it to go. That's happened to me many times. I've started writing a story thinking it will be a particular kind of story and it just doesn't work. Then sometimes either you drop it completely, just throw it out and start with something new, or you think about where it stopped being interesting for you. Because usually you'll find that's the point at which the story started going off. because you started trying to push it in a direction which the story didn't want to go there, So then, like when I was writing the first book of Zain and Anna, At Least a Fish, I remember very clearly at which point I started I'd written a lot, and then I realized it's just not working. It was not going anywhere. I just got stuck. So I deleted like half of the thing and restarted at that point. So you shouldn't get discouraged when that happens. It happens to the best of writers that, you get stuck. You just have to keep trying till you reach a point where you're enjoying it. It's only when you're enjoying it that the story will turn out the way, will turn out to be a story that other people also enjoy.
I'm sure
That
follow for young writers over here. They'll have a lot to take away from what you've just given to them. Also, ma'am, nonsense was a difficult genre,
it
and
is.
you had to adapt it to Indian English. So was it challenging?
The adapting to Indian English was not difficult because, I mean, see, what is Indian English? The Indian English is the English that we are familiar with, that we speak, right? So as long as you don't try to, speak with, like the British, because we're not the British. So when we speak like Indians, we speak like Indians, we think like Indians. So that is not the difficult part. Writing nonsense is not easy. Everybody thinks it's like, what's the big deal? You just don't have to make sense. Not making sense is actually very difficult because it's not something we're trained to do. We're trained to make sense. We're trained in language in a way that it should make sense. It should be understandable. It should have meaning. So to actually write something which doesn't have meaning is not easy because it's not gibberish. Nonsense is not gibberish. Like if you just make funny sounds, that's, which have no meaning, like that's not nonsense. That's gibberish. Whereas nonsense is a very specific genre where it sounds like it makes perfect sense, but when you actually think about it, it doesn't. You got to pause and think, what did she just say? And then you realize that it doesn't make any sense. Whereas when you first hear it, it seems to make sense, and that's when it is nonsense. So, and there are many techniques for writing nonsense, but frankly, I didn't come to it through techniques. I came through it just through loving the genre. I read Lewis Carroll, especially Lewis Carroll, also Edward Lear, but I'm a huge fan of Lewis Carroll. And so I came to nonsense just by reading a lot of Lewis Carroll and just loving his poems, The Walrus and the Carpenter and Jabberwocky and all of those. Like if you, just to give an example of how nonsense seems to make sense and doesn't, I'll just recite a few lines of Jabberwocky. It's one of the few poems that I do remember. So it was brillig and the slithy toves, did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogoves and mome rates outbrave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub bird and shun the frumious bandersnatch. So you see, it creates a mood, it creates a story, but actually it's full of nonsense words. There's no such thing as a jabber. What's frumious? What's bandersnatch? It's full of nonsense words, but because of the way it's structured, it seems to make sense. It seems, and if you read the whole poem, you actually imagine a whole story with words that make no sense at all. So that's the thing of nonsense. It kind of strides the line between sense and meaninglessness. And that's a difficult balancing act. And I think it only happens when you're at least for me, it only happens when I'm in a certain mood. So it's great fun though. And it's great fun because you can just let go of logic and you can let go of meaning, which you can't normally do in normal life. You always have to make sense. It gets a bit boring. Sometimes it's nice to not even try to make sense, Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it is indeed a difficult genre, and you have totally, completely mastered it, ma'am. So we
Thank
love.
you.
Thank you. Okay, one last one. So, ma'am, your Tiger on a Tree, your first book, I believe, was illustrated first, and then you added text to it, right?
Yes.
So, what do you enjoy more between writing a text than get it illustrated, or writing the text when the pictures are already done? I think.
The thing is that I really do enjoy writing to pictures. It's just great fun because sometimes when I look at a picture, it kind of suggests all kinds of interesting things to me. I wish I had the book here, which I would give you a very good example. But with Tiger on a Tree, what happened was it was my very first book, right? I had just started working at Tara. and they had done a workshop with a bunch of illustrators, one of whom was Pulak Bishwas, like the grandfather of children's illustrators in India. So he'd done this beautiful set of illustrations based on a story that he'd heard about a tiger in the Sundarbans which had escaped and gotten to the village, and then the villagers caught it. And in the real story, what really happened was that they sent it off to a zoo. But Pulakda wanted to go to the zoo. So in his illustrations, the tiger actually goes back home to its island. So how Sundarbans is made up of different islands. So the tiger swam through the river and went back to its island. But the story that I was given to write, it was fully done. The illustrations told the whole story by themselves. So I told Geeta, who's the editor, I said, what is there to add to this? I mean, Pulakda has already told the whole story in pictures. What is there to add to it? But she said, no, we do need words. Now, I didn't find there was any point in saying that there was a tiger, because you could see the tiger. The tiger jumped into the water. You could see it jump. And the tiger saw a goat. You could see the goat. So what's the point of repeating what's already there in the pictures? So I wrote verse that was kind of tangential to the pictures, So kind of got into the tiger's head. What could the tiger be thinking? And slightly nonsensical what the people are saying, there were little bits of absurdity and nonsense in it. So it's kind of tangential to the text, so the text to the illustrations. The text is kind of works with the illustration, but also adds another dimension. And that's how that tiger happened. And that was a great way to start writing, because it was just such an interesting experience, the whole thing of looking at the pictures, having a story that's already told, and then trying to tell it in a way that makes it, so that you're not repeating the pictures. And that's it is great fun to do. I do like doing that. I've done a lot of books like that, where they just give me a bunch. Sometimes they just give me a bunch of pictures and I just have to make up a story to them, which are not evident. Like sometimes it's not evident. Like in this case, the story was there. There was already a story. I just had to tell it in an interesting way. Sometimes there's no story. I have to make up the story around the pictures, which I've done in a book called Excuse Me, Is This India? But the book like Crocodile, what I did was, see, the fun in writing picture books is in trying to add something to the illustrator's thing, or the illustrator adds to the text. So when I did this book also with Pulak Bishwas, what I did was I wrote out the whole story in prose, like, describing the characters and who and what they did. Then Pulakda came back with the illustrations, and I realized that there was no need to describe the characters because he'd already done it so beautifully visually, So then I just chucked the whole text, and then I used the pictures and wrote the text again in verse with, I'll show you, look at the characters, look at the doctor. Actually, the doctor I always feel looks a little bit like Pulakda. And then there was this fantastic Bhayanak Singh, the wrestler. So though I had described Bhayanak Singh, when I got the picture, I realized there's no need for a description. So I just chucked the whole text and wrote it again with the illustrations in front of me. So that's a very fun thing to do. But I have also written books where I just gave the text to the illustrator, and the illustrator has gone, beyond the text and done really interesting things. Like one of my favorite books like that is Today's My Day, which was done by a South African illustrator. And of course, I won't remember his name now, but he's fantastic. And he took the text and he just, added so many fun elements to it that it's still one of my favorite books of mine. So both ways are fun, the whole process of doing a picture book is great fun because it's so collaborative.
Thank you, ma'am. I love the fact that you have a story for each of your titles, and we can go on and on.
Every one of them has an entirely different story. Some of them have come out in really bizarre ways, and that's really the part of the fun of writing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. We do have time constraints, so I would love to go on though. And maybe we could do it some other time when we have a much longer session.
Yeah, I know. And I really hope this pandemic gets over and we can actually meet people face to face. This Zoom thing is really not satisfying enough,
So we do hope to see you in physical space soon, and praying for things to settle down and get back to normal. So thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
In Anushka ma'am's words, There's nothing to it. Just write and read, read, read. Keep your eyes and ears open and hold on to your sense of wonder. I'm pretty sure each one of us present here thoroughly enjoyed your reading of the texts. Many of us at NIMS have been reading and enjoying your books. They are hilarious and insightful at the same time. Ma'am, we eagerly look forward to more publications by you. On behalf of all the aspiring writers and readers here, I thank you for such a wonderful session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sakshi. Thanks to all of you. I really had fun. I mean, I couldn't see any of you, but still, I had fun just reading. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.